Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the podcast. I took a little bit of a break over the summer here in Australia. My two children were on summer holiday break from their schools, so I took a little bit of break from the podcast and I did some reruns. But I am coming back to talk about a topic that is really, really important, and that is cholesterol. And the reason why it's important is because heart disease is the number one killer of men and women in the Western world. It is the thing that will take most of us out, not cancer. And I think a lot of people get surprised by that fact. A lot of people are very, very fearful of cancer. I mean, of course, all right, we all are. But it's heart disease that is the number one killer. So we have to talk about this more. It's not talked about enough, especially in the perimenopause, menopause space, which has, really increased in popularity, people talking about it in recent years. But where's all the talk about heart disease? And when we talk heart disease, we have to talk about cholesterol. And I want to set the record straight on this because there's a lot of misinformation about cholesterol, and I think it's probably causing a lot of people harm. What I see in my client population are people who have markers that are, quite problematic, but their doctors have done nothing about it. So I really want to tell you what I know about cholesterol because I have done deep dives into this because of my own cholesterol issues. So first of all, as always, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a medical doctor. This is not advice. This is information only. Check with your doctor, talk to your doctor and do your own research, okay? And I also want to give credit where credit's due. So what really got me thinking about this was when I came across the work of a man called Simon Campbell. Simon Campbell, I think he's got a YouTube channel, which we will link to in the show notes. Simon Campbell I think he's a journalist, and he was somebody who really got me thinking about this. And then Cynthia Thurlow on her podcast, she had Dr. Thomas Dayspring on, and he's a lipidemiologist. And I started to listen to those master classes, and then I did my own research. And this is what I've come up with. And I've only got two questions around my health, and one of them was about my high cholesterol, and I have absolutely discovered out what was going on there. And so we're going to get into it all. First of all, high cholesterol is not good for you. What you might be seeing, there's a particular study that's been doing the rounds on social media, and influencers and health coaches or whomever have been running with this and saying those with low cholesterol will basically die earlier than those with high cholesterol. There is nuance that is completely missed. Be careful because those kind of posts, they leave out all the nuance, and it's not that simple. It's not that black and white. And they can be doing a lot of harm to people. And there's a lot of, keto and carnivore bros out there who definitely want to believe that high cholesterol is better than low cholesterol because they're eating all this saturated fat. And some of them are going to be having specific genetics, which would mean that their cholesterol will rise from that. And they don't want to, they don't want to assume that it's their diet that could be causing any issues, but it absolutely can. You've got to be very, very careful what you read online. And when it comes to that study, high cholesterol wasn't even very high, and neither high nor low cholesterol is healthy. So, yeah, the functional medicine space has a lot to answer for. And, we also hear a lot from people that statins are the devil. Well, they're not the devil. We live in an age where we've got modern day medicine at our disposal. We are incredibly lucky to have that. And we're going to get into all of that because these messages have been massively overhyped and oversimplified and pushed way beyond what the evidence ultimately shows us. It is true that if we didn't have cholesterol, we would die. Cholesterol is very, very important, but it doesn't mean that high cholesterol is good. I actually fell victim to a lot of this nonsense. Back in the day, before I got enough experience, listened to people who I thought were way smarter than I was. I read a book, actually, it's right there on my shelf. I should probably get rid of it. And that book, I thought I could trust that book. I had listened to an influencer who I had great respect for, and I still have great respect for, who is very smart. And I think they had mentioned this book, and I got this book. This was quite a few years ago, and I formulated some thoughts on cholesterol. I even did a podcast on cholesterol, which I have since deleted, because if I believe that there's outdated evidence, I want to get rid of that outdated viewpoint, right? I am the first person to say I change my mind on things, whether it be testing, whether it be, cholesterol, whatever the case may be. I will be honest with you guys, and I will tell you what I changed my mind on and why. So I have deleted that episode because I do not believe that to be true anymore. And it was really based on thinking that there are people out there talking a lot about cholesterol who knew what they were talking about, but they didn't, right? Isn't that a shame? But such is this industry that we're in. Okay, so I'll tell you real quick about my cholesterol story. So I have had high cholesterol for decades, probably since I was a very, very young child, because I have since done my own children's blood work and seen that they also have some cholesterol issues. My youngest, who is only 11, has very high cholesterol levels. And this is a genetic thing. And this is what's not talked enough about in this functional wellness space. So my high cholesterol's probably been going on for decades, which is a shame because that can do damage. And I did raise this with my doctor many years ago, but she didn't seem to be terribly concerned. She said, we'll run a coronary calcium score. So a coronary calcium score, it looks for how calcified your arteries are, essentially. And mine came back as a 0. And then that's the best result that you can get, is 0 calcium, right? So that was great. And it was really reassuring at the time. And I thought, great, I guess my really high cholesterol is a non-issue. I've got a 0 calcium score. But then what I came to realize is that those coronary calcium scores, they really reflect end stage issues, right? End stage disease. So ideally you should have no calcification. And so really it gave me a false sense of security. Since then, I have learnt that the way better scan that we have is called a CIMT, carotid intermediate thickness scan, and it's an ultrasound, and it's an ultrasound on the carotid arteries. And that is the best tool that we have to date, and everybody listening to this should get one, to tell us about early stage atherosclerosis, early stage plaque buildup, right? So that is, non-invasive. It's just an ultrasound. So that is something that I would urge you to get, because it's really going to tell you how much plaque you have built up in your carotid arteries. So over the years, I really questioned my high cholesterol. And because I see a lot of blood work. I see a lot of women's blood work panels. And I never really saw people who had the kind of cholesterol that myself and my husband actually had. And I was thinking, what's going on here? But everywhere I turned in the wellness space, in the functional health space, there was this story that high cholesterol isn't a problem. And I'm sitting here thinking, yeah, but mine's really high compared to most people's. There's something going on here. No one was talking about what that could possibly be. And so I decided I would dig deep. I decided I would do some research into this, because I was skeptical. So I knew that my thyroid wasn't driving high cholesterol. Sometimes thyroid health can drive high cholesterol. So we'll talk a little bit about that later on. And I knew that my metabolic health wasn't driving high cholesterol either. So this is what we will commonly hear in the functional medicine, wellness, nutritionist, health coach space, is that high cholesterol, if you've got some high cholesterol, it's probably a thyroid or your metabolic health. But I knew that wasn't my picture. I am very metabolically fit. I have all these check marks against my metabolic health markers. I'm fit. I'm not overweight. I've got good muscle mass. My thyroid was not a problem. I haven't got hypothyroidism. I never have. I check my thyroid all the time. So I knew that that was not what was driving my cholesterol. So I kept searching for an explanation, couldn't find one. Even my doctor didn't have the answer. And, at the time, again, she did not seem really concerned. So So I was like, well, if you're not concerned, but in hindsight, she should have been. And so should have I. And interestingly, she recently told me that her understanding has evolved along the same trajectory to mine when it came to what I was talking to her about recently about my high cholesterol, what I had found out, the medications that I was wanting to try, etc. So she was like, "Yeah, you and I have been really going down this rabbit hole at the same pace, it seems." So I decided that I was going to trial a medication, and this was not a random decision. Again, this was about 18 months or so of deep research. I'm going to tell you all about that medication. It's not a statin, so I'm going to tell you all about that. And I've completely changed my position on cholesterol, and I'm really grateful that I did. So, like I said before, my husband also has high cholesterol. He is also very, very fit, doesn't have a thyroid problem. The reason we have high cholesterol is due to genetics. That's the reason, and that's what needs to be spoken about so much more. You know, I knew because of my cholesterol and my husband's cholesterol, I knew that my children would highly likely have a cholesterol issue. And indeed, they do. They do. And the beautiful thing about my investigations is that I ran the blood work early for them. I ran it last week, I think it was. And we can intervene early with them. We can get them the help that they need, that diet and lifestyle will not touch. Don't get it twisted. You know, there's these purists out there in the health and wellness space that think that modern day medicine is evil, or all medications are evil. And that's just stupid. It's ignorance, it's stupidity. I just have no time for that kind of nonsense because it simply is not true. So, you know, I'm very happy that my children are going to get what they need early on because I had to wait till I was almost 40, well, yeah, I was 46 when I started on this medication and my husband 55. So, you know, it's really important that we're on these medications too, because nothing else is going to lower our cholesterol. And with the markers that we have, and I'll get into some of what they are, they're not the typical cholesterol markers. You need to understand the two most important ones that your doctor either has not run or hasn't explained to you, or has run and you might need medication, but they didn't know how to read them. There's only two markers really. And when those are high, then your risk of advanced stage cardiovascular disease, it really does significantly skyrocket the longer those are elevated. So unfortunately, I had almost 50 years and my husband definitely had 50 years. So what I eventually discovered is that I am what is known as a hyper absorber of cholesterol. This is genetically driven again, and it's when I eat saturated fat, I hyper absorb the cholesterol out of those foods, and that drives up all my cholesterol markers. My triglycerides have never been high, and that's again because I'm very metabolically fit. It doesn't touch the triglycerides, but it did touch the LDL and the HDL, and these other two markers that I'm going to go into. So if you've got high LDL and also high HDL, that's a little ding, ding, ding that you're probably a hyper absorber, but you could also be something called a hyper synthesizer. So the absorption is when you're absorbing too much from the food you're eating. The hyper synthesizer is somebody who's making more cholesterol than what they need, right? So our cells make cholesterol, our liver makes cholesterol, our brain makes cholesterol. But if you overmake it, you can have high levels, and that's genetic again. And so again, this is why I really hate these blanket statements in the online health world, like dietary cholesterol does not raise cholesterol. I cannot tell you how many times I have been taught that, taught it, told it, taught it, read it, because that is simply not true for about 1 in 5 people, myself included. Okay, so it may be true that there are people whereby your dietary cholesterol does not impact your cholesterol numbers, okay? But for the 1 in 5 individuals who have the kind of genetics that I do, that is absolutely not true, and it dramatically increases all cholesterol levels. And I actually did have this evidence well before the last 18 months. You know, I actually, after my second daughter was born, I decided that I would go vegan. Don't even worry about it. It was just a bit of an experiment. And one of the things I wanted to see is if my cholesterol would drop, because I was told your cholesterol that you eat doesn't impact your cholesterol. And my cholesterol did drop. It did. I was vegan for 3 months, and as I recall it, I was very quite strict about it all, which, oh gosh, I couldn't do that this day and age. Um, and my cholesterol numbers dropped. And I was like, what? Why? What's going on? How come all the people I speak to are telling me that my diet doesn't impact my cholesterol when clearly it does? And unfortunately, it wasn't until recent times I really figured out why. Okay, so um, very frustrating, yes, but let's listen. It's in hindsight, and at least I know, at least I'm on the right medication. I got my husband on what he needs to be on, and we'll sort out the children as well. There is a test that you can do to determine if you're a hyperabsorber. That test is not available in Australia. It is called the Boston Heart Panel. You can get it in the US, and that is something that you should do if you can get that. We'll get into it later. And yeah, so in many ways, that vegan experiment turned out to be a very happy, fortunate accident, so to speak, because it supported my hypothesis, which was I knew that my cholesterol had dropped when I went vegan. Therefore, as I started to learn all this, it makes sense to me that my high cholesterol, because it's not metabolically driven, it's not thyroid driven, it makes sense to me that it's coming from my diet. Therefore, it makes sense to me that I'm what I've now realized is called a hyperabsorber. And so I went to my doctor and I said, hey, doc, this is my hypothesis. I would like to be on this particular medication, which blocks the absorption of cholesterol in the gut. She agreed with me with my hypothesis. And sure enough, cholesterol markers went way, way down. So we're going to talk about all of that. Okay. So cholesterol. It is what is it? Let's just talk briefly about what it is. It is a waxy substance and it's made in every cell of the body. Our cell membranes contain cholesterol. Sometimes, though, like I said before, the liver is going to make cholesterol if your cells are not making or can't make enough. Some of it comes from diet. And like I said, some people are more prone to absorbing it than others. We move cholesterol around the body in these taxi cabs. That's important to understand because cholesterol is a waxy sort of substance that is not mixing well with the blood. And so you need to put that cholesterol into these taxi cabs so it can get transported around the body and to go where it needs to go, right? Lipids and blood, they don't mix. So these taxi cabs are called LDL. HDL, VLDL, chyromicrons. It gets actually very confusing, and I'm not sitting here saying I am any kind of an expert on cholesterol. I defer to Dr. Thomas Dayspring. He's a real smart cookie when it comes to this stuff, and I'm going to see if I can get him on the podcast. So we have these lipids that move around in these taxi cabs. And so because of this, there's really no bad or good cholesterol, which we'll talk about. Cholesterol is a precursor to our our steroid hormones, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, aldosterone, cortisol, and precursor to vitamin D, to bile. It's very, very important, but elevated levels are a risk factor for cardiovascular disease and dementia, actually. And there's no debate on this. The science is really clear on this topic. So what are the best cholesterol blood tests to run? Okay, so it's important to firstly understand that these lipids are acute phase reactants, meaning they are going to increase when there is inflammation, illness, injury. So what you do not want to do is you don't want to test your cholesterol markers when you're sick. It's just best practice. Don't go and get bloods done when you've been sick, if they're just general bloods, you don't want to get them done if you've been sick or you've been injured, because that injury, that illness, that inflammation can definitely cause a lot of markers to get skewed. And in particular, these lipids are going to arise when you've had an illness or inflammation. Okay. They're going to be misleading results. So keep that in mind. Now, you can get a full cholesterol panel, you can get total cholesterol, you can get your LDL, your HDL, your triglycerides, very important to get your triglycerides. You've probably heard about these before. The LDL and the HDL, you've probably heard that LDL is bad cholesterol and HDL is good cholesterol. That's not actually true at all. So remember that the LDL and the HDL, these are lipoproteins and they are the taxi cabs. Okay. And cholesterol is inside of them. So therefore the LDL and the HDL cholesterol that's inside these lipoprotein taxi cabs is neither good nor bad. HDL, lower HDL does typically track more with poorer metabolic health. So this is where, if you're a hyperabsorber like me, everything was elevated except my triglycerides, right? And that's a big check mark for good metabolic health. But my HDL was really elevated too. So that's a bit of a ding, ding, ding. You're overproducing or overabsorbing. But if you've got high LDL, low HDL, high triglycerides, you've probably more got a metabolic dysfunction picture driving those lipid imbalances. So that there are these patterns that a practitioner will look at to sort of determine what might be going on with your cholesterol. And if you want my support on this, if you want me to read your cholesterol panel, book in for a 30-minute consult with me and we can go through it. You can send me your blood work and I can give you my interpretation. We don't know everything about HDLs though. Again, it's very complex. Cholesterol, far more complex than I think we've been led to believe. Thank you for listening. Please share this. Heart disease is the #1 killer of men and women in the Western world. Everybody needs to know about this. Everybody. Share it out far and wide. Thanks for listening and bye for now. I am not a medical professional, and the information provided in this podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. I do not have access to your individual medical history or circumstances, so the content discussed here should not be considered as medical advice. Before making any changes to your diet, lifestyle, or considering the use of supplements, please consult with a qualified healthcare professional or your doctor to ensure it's safe and appropriate for your specific situation. Any decisions you make based on the content of this podcast are at your own discretion and risk. Thank you for tuning in.